So we'll go ahead and get started. So some people may join a little bit later. So apologies if I'm fiddling around up here on the keyboard. I'll try to watch the chat window and then also as people join so I can go ahead and let them into the group. So uh, good evening and welcome to our second online Dharma talk for the Thursday evening. As I mentioned before, if there's any trouble hearing me or if we have any glitches or anything like that, please let me know either in the chat window or I have everyone's on mute right now. So if I miss anything, feel free to wave your hand or wave at me and I'll try to unmute you. I think you can unmute yourself, but if you want to ask a question, feel free. If I miss that, feel free to come on screen and wave or raise your hand, and I'll try to keep track of those things. So apologies if I get carried away with talking and miss anybody's question or raised hand. So the laptop screen is only so big, so some of you are really small. So it's April 30th. That means we're probably like most areas at least over a month into sheltering in place, quarantine, or things being shut down. I know for a lot of, I think here in Oregon, it started around mid-March. In many ways, it feels like it's been going on forever, and other times it feels like we just started. So there's a lot of changes. I've had a lot of Zoom meetings the last few weeks, and it's become my practice to just check in with everyone. So my hope is no one is directly affected by the coronavirus, or worse, no one's been, lost anyone that they care about. But I want to acknowledge it as a distinct possibility. I did talk to someone earlier today, and they had just been tested because they were ill. Luckily, they tested negative, but there could be a lot of things on our mind. So if that comes up for anyone, if you'd like to share your experience, we can do that too as we go through today. But I just want to acknowledge kind of what we're all going through. So just to start off. So before I get started, are there any questions either about last week, the portion of the text, other questions in general? Happy to answer those if I can. I had one question on the selection of statuary behind me, so any questions are okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
Actually about Reverend Imanaka's Dharma talk.
Yes.
That he did. You were present for that?
Yes.
The statue that he held up, the Fudo that is the Ken.
Yes.
And he called it by another name that I was unfamiliar with. Do you recall what that was and the significance of it? Was like Samyo or something like that?
The Sammaya form.
Sanmaya.
So you will often see in Shingon, that's a really good question. You'll often see in Shingon, especially in the mandalas, that the statuary or I wish I had an example here. I don't think I do. Statuary or deities or ideas can be represented in traditionally one of three ways, either as a actual statue. So I have a small statue of Fudo here.
Yes.
My little Fudo. And the deity can be represented that way, or can also be represented in their symbolic form. So Fudo's symbolic form is usually the sword.
Mm-hmm.
And they could also be represented as the mantra. So usually the Sita or Bija. So that's one free way. So you'll sometimes see the mandala depicted this way, either as all the individual small images painted, the seed syllable of those deities, or in
Right, the
their symbolic
Bonji.
form. Yeah, that's the bonji,
Mm.
or just the sword or the implement they're holding, or something along those lines.
Okay.
So there's a whole bunch of different reasons why that's done. My quick, brief answer to that: sometimes we get too attached to seeing things one way, and we forget the teaching that's behind it. So this came up. You can make a good comparison to the kind of iconoclastic movement in the West, right? Get rid of all the statuary or forms and really focus on the ideas. So Islam has this idea, so they don't make any, they don't use statuary. But if you've ever gone to a mosque, especially a more traditional one, they'll have a lot of Arabic calligraphy, and it's very beautiful. And it's covering the ceiling and things like that. So Shingon has this similar idea where rather than getting too fixated on, it has to be this sort of human image, that we use a symbol or the mantra or just the bija, the one syllable, to have us focus on the teaching. So all these different ways are used.
Mm. Okay. And the Maya in Sun Maya is, do you know what the meaning is?
Oh, good question. I think in that usage, Samaya is just symbolic. But
Okay.
I can make a
Okay.
note and actually go back and look at the Sanskrit.
Okay.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
But I've always learned it or thought of it as, the symbolic form.
The symbolic. Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
And you'll see that they'll actually refer to it as the Samaya Mandala. So you actually have just the symbols.
Right. Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Hmm?
That fleshes it out. I understand much better now.
Oh, I thought it was interesting when he held it up. I was like, oh, that's a good way to talk about the idea. So
Yes. Yeah.
A lot of the temples are doing services online and that kind of thing. So I thought it would be good to let, rather than compete and, we have service at the same time and make people choose.
Yeah.
Since Seattle and Portland are so close, we often collaborate on Hoshimatsuri and some of the other services. So I think it's good, it's a great way for people to see one of the other temples also. So
I'm very much enjoying getting to know Reverend Imanaka.
we've known each other for what year is it? 12 years. So as I mentioned the last time I was in Seattle, when I met Imanaka Sensei, we were both grunts, I should say. We were kind of like nobody. And we actually were doing training at the same time, and we were roommates. So
Okay.
we would spend all night long talking and kind of discussing ways to teach or get the message out. And I don't think any of us at that time would have guessed there would be some online video conferencing ability. So it's been really interesting to see how all of this evolves, and we're both in the same area of the country now. So
Okay. Thank you.
you're welcome. So I will jump back into the actual text, and I think we left off on page 22, and I'll read part of the text and try to give some insight into why this part is important. And I think I mentioned before, these writings can be terse. Right? They can be difficult to understand initially. So that's fine if you read it and you have questions, or if it's not immediately evident, it was written quite a while ago and would have been understandable to the audience it was intended for. It's still very useful for us to today, but we have two layers, right? We have a layer of we have a layer. I hope you're not getting the feedback. So I think I fixed it. Okay. We have a layer of the text itself being about a varied, multi-level philosophical ideas, and then we have the translators, what I call translator speech. So oh, maybe that fixed it. Okay. So you get translator speech where in the going, especially from classical Chinese to English, we end up with, you have to add terms. So classical Chinese, the grammar's much more simple than English. And in the process to flesh out words and tenses, we get word usage that is very unnatural in English. So we'll try to read past some of that and pick apart why it's beneficial and helpful. So I think I said this the same thing last week. I didn't initially think this was a good text to talk about in the middle of this pandemic, but the more I look at it, the more I think actually it is really on point and helpful for this time. So this section falls under a part of the text that's called the characteristics of the essence of enlightenment. So it's asking us to reflect on what our mind is like. So we should be asking that question, what is our mind like? And then secondarily, have we ever asked that question before? And probably not. We probably assume that whatever our mind is like is the way it should be, that it's normal, that everybody thinks the way we think, and that it's as to be expected. So if we think our mind is the same as others, then we've probably decided that this way of thinking that we have is preferable to some other way of thinking. So if we don't question, then we actually end up with a whole set of assumptions that we're probably unaware of. So we'll pick up where we left off last time. The text says, third, it is like a mirror that is free from the defiled objects reflected in it. This can be said because the non-empty state of original enlightenment is genuine, pure, and bright, being free from hindrances, both affectional and intellectual, and transcending characteristics of that which is compounded. For example, the storehouse consciousness. So this part of the text is presenting us with an description of what the enlightened mind is like. So if we find that part of the text confusing, it's because it's telling us what our mind isn't. It's saying this is what the enlightened mind is like. We're not enlightened, so it might be a bit of a head scratcher, and it's supposed to be. So you can turn it around. You can ask questions of it. Is this how our mind works? No. Does our mind observe external things without being affected? So can we watch a scene or see a movie or go outside and see something and not be affected at all by what we see? So no, that's not how our mind works. And so it gives, this part of the text gives examples. It says the enlightened mind is free from hindrances, both affectional and intellectual. And that sounds really boring. It sounds like we're a lump of coal, that we have no emotion, no affection, like there's no introspection or intellectualization about things. And that's not exactly how we should understand this. So I'll try to give a better example that probably a little bit more day-to-day for most of us, especially most of us in quarantine. I've heard from a lot of friends that they're watching probably too much television and many of them have given up on homeschooling and they just giving the kids the iPads and other things. So if you're watching TV, then you can ask, what makes TV compelling to watch, right? Why do you watch it? What keeps your attention? Why does it keep your attention? If you're flipping through, I can't say channels anymore. If you're flipping through streams on, with the remote, what do you stop on, right? So this can be your meditation. What do you stop on and why? And how long do you stay with it? What shows are you watching and why is that? I use the TV example often for a reason. TV is emotional. It builds up excitement, suspense. It moves you in some manner. The other night I watched a spiritually themed Korean movie, and Korean movies are known to be very melodramatic, and they're sort of designed to manipulate your emotions. So kind of no matter how tough you are, you start to feel like, oh, it's so touching. So they do a really good job of that, and that's why it's entertaining. That's why it keeps your interest. It grabs you in some way. So you can use television watching as a meditative exercise, right? So you can watch your pulse, right? If there's a suspenseful scene, you can watch your breathing. I've watched other people watch TV and they'll stop breathing, or they'll watch like, they're like really, really captivated by it. So that's what this part of the text is talking about. The things we see really move us. They really grab us, and they really they change our mind. So our mind is grasping and grabbing onto these things. If you could see deeper, right? If you could actually sort of watch your bloodstream, you'd see all these hormones, chemicals changing in your blood as you watch the scene. And so what makes television compelling is this up and down, right? It's up and down, up and down. And then there's some comic relief or something, and then it builds back up. But if it was just, think back, at least when I was in school, we had to watch these kind of government documentaries. And I remember it must have been the same person narrating all of them in his very monotone voice. And, well, now we'll watch the Hoover Dam being constructed. It was very, so you had to really work at watching these and sticking with it, because not all of them were very compelling. So this is what this part of the text is talking about. This is the distinction that's being drawn. How easy is it for anything that passes in front of your mind to disturb your mind? If we do nothing, right, it's incredibly easy for the mind to be disturbed. Thanks to the magic, I'll say, of social media, you can watch everyone else's disturbance in real time. Someone posts something, somebody else gets upset, it starts this cascade of emotions. So people can trigger one another on and on and on. So that's what this part of the text is talking about. So it's saying this is part of the mind as compared to the enlightened mind. And don't worry, it's not all negative. The text is pointing this out for a reason. It's saying that you can actually use that as a method of introspection. If you could just watch and observe, it says, the text is saying, here's the test. I postulate the mind is like this. Then you could observe your own mind and you'd be like, oh, it is like that. So these are testable hypotheses. You can actually go through and see, does it work, right? So that was the third. So fourth, going on in the text is fourth, it is like a mirror influencing a person to cultivate his capacity for goodness, serving as a coordinating cause to encourage him in his endeavors. Because the essence of enlightenment is free from defiled objects, it universally illumines the mind of a human being and induces him to cultivate his capacity for goodness, presenting itself in accordance with his desires as a mirror presents his appearance. I like reading things like this, but I admit it's not written in a way that most things that we read today are written. So we can read this and go, oh gosh, so we're so easily influenced. This really sucks. What's the point? I'm never going to attain anything, right? I'm so changeable. But the text actually says, the mirror-like quality is there if we choose. If we practice real mindfulness, not the corner store magazine cover variety of mindfulness, but real mindfulness, then any distraction, any obstacle, if we develop awareness of it, is a tool for transforming the mind. So I grew up in Detroit, so I'm partially genetically predisposed to seeing classic cars. I can't help it, right? Go for a walk, someone's garage is open, I see a classic car. It just is a thing. Other people don't notice, right? Other people are going to have something else that catches their eye. So I can use that tendency of my mind as a meditation. So if my attention is captured by a classic car, I say, ooh, a 38 Chevy. Then I could say, oh, my mind was moved, right? So if I'm developing awareness of it, that's mindfulness. So the text here is saying, these are all strategies you can use. If you're developing awareness of it, you're progressing. If you just let it happen all the time, you're not making progress. So it's not a totally negative thing. It says the mind works this way. So try to develop awareness. That developing of awareness is your steps along the spiritual path. Is it easy? Yes and no. The text tells us that it's available. It's available every second of every moment. If we develop awareness of it on our own. If we can see our mental process, this is getting us closer to that goal. If we don't even try, we get swept away in this kind of rushing torrent of thoughts and emotions. And that's where most people are. So I'll tell you a secret. I've made it a practice to not comment on politics on social media. And sometimes I have to sit and go, oh, is this actually a political thing, or is it like a social good, or, try to develop awareness. So what's my motivation for posting, reposting, commenting, or, addressing something? Is it to push a political agenda, or is it to highlight something that's beneficial for people? So it becomes in this way a meditation. So there are good and bad parts of social media, right? The temple uses it to announce things. I am able to keep up with the events at other temples and Buddhist groups. There's downsides also. I have classmates and going back to grade school, and it's nice to see what's going on with them from time to time. But from time to time, I also see things I may not want to see, or I don't agree with, or I might shake my head and go, oh, why did they put that out? So then the question is, each time I see that, it's a practice. Do you comment or not? Right. So just that observation is part of this mindfulness practice. You could kind of go further. The text is saying not cultivating, right? Not practicing is a type of practice. Cultivating results in what the text says, universally illumines the mind of human beings and induces him to cultivate his capacity for goodness. So that's what you get if you cultivate. What if you don't cultivate? Not cultivating does what? So it's the opposite of cultivating your capacity for goodness. So you're cultivating something else. So I know sometimes these texts can be a little, it's easier to listen to me than to read sometimes. They're old books. But if you ask questions of it, if it makes an inference and you turn it around and say, well, what's the opposite of that? It says this is beneficial. What's the opposite? That's a really good way to work with sutra text or a commentary like this. So here it's telling us we should cultivate, because not cultivating is just letting our mind, run away with us, that we can actually have control of this process. Okay. So we'll keep going a little bit farther down on the text. So it's the sub B, the aspect of non-enlightenment. I'm going to give my more modern spin on some of this because try to bring it up to date a little bit, but we'll read this next passage. Because of not truly realizing oneness with suchness, there emerges an unenlightened mind and consequently its thoughts. These thoughts do not have any validity to be substantiated, therefore they are not independent of the original enlightenment. It is like the case of a man who has lost his way. He is confused because of his wrong sense of direction. He is freed from the notion of direction altogether when there will be no such thing as going astray. It is the same with human beings. Because of the notion of enlightenment, they are confused. But if they are freed from the fixed notion of enlightenment, then there will be no such thing as non-enlightenment. Because there are people of unenlightened, deluded mind, for them we speak of true enlightenment, knowing well that this relative term stands for. Knowing well what this relative term stands for. Independent of the unenlightened mind, there are no independent marks of true enlightenment itself that can be discussed. Okay. My commentary. If we don't work on the enlightened mind, if we don't work on our mind, the unenlightened mind arises. That's sort of the one sentence distillation of that paragraph. So it's easier to think of it this way. If we don't take care of our bodies, illness readily arises. Right? The same idea can be expressed that the potential for health or illness exists in your body at the same time. Right? There's this potential. What makes one person healthy or another person ill? There's a lot of factors: genetics, location, diet. But we can all agree that if we take better care of ourselves, is better than not taking care of ourselves. So we have different karmic obstacles, we have different experiences, but what is the same in these situations is that some action is more beneficial than no action. So no matter what our starting point is, so let's say both our parents are Olympic athletes and we have the best genetics ever, we can undermine it with our actions. If the opposite is true, let's say, we have every recessive gene that you can possibly find. If we do nothing, we'll probably see what that results. If we do something healthy or beneficial, we're more likely to not see a result we don't want. So the same is this with our karmic obstacles. We have different experiences, but it's the same that some action is better than no action. I'll give you a more tangible experiment. So back in the 90s, I lived in China. And at the time, I was really fascinated. I had friends who were just starting to have kids, and you go visit, and the children all wanted fried food and French fries and junk food and candy. And if you put vegetables in front of them, they really would protest. And I noticed a lot of families had a hard time getting their kids to eat healthy food. So when I went to live in China, I thought, I wonder if kids in China give their parents such a hard time, or if the parents have, the struggle also. So I'd go out to dinner with classmates or other teachers at the university where I was, and I'd watch the interaction with the kids. And lo and behold, the kids would sit and they would eat their vegetables and, no protest. They just happily eat whatever they were given. And I thought, okay, well, maybe there's just one really good kid. I look around the other tables and, no crying and screaming and running around and, begging for junk food. And so I was a bit of a mystery. And then I reflected on it more and I realized there's a couple reasons for this. One, junk food was more expensive then in China. So it wasn't really readily available. There was less of it. So it was very similar to the example the text gives. It's like the man who's lost his way in the text. When he's freed of the notion of direction, he doesn't go astray. So if the kids here were freed of the idea of alternative food, so they didn't go astray from the healthy food. So they had no notion of the junk food. But if you gave them junk food, they'd eat it. And shortly after I was there, they started having, the first obese children. So before that, you hardly would ever see an obese kid, especially where I live, kind of far away from a lot of the bigger cities. Um, so health, or being healthy, was um, not so much a conscious choice to avoid junk food, but its lack. So now you've seen, kind of after that whole process of more junk food and fast food being introduced, more children having obesity. And I think in the mid 2000s, there was a huge health food craze for people to kind of go back to healthy eating, but it went very quickly. It was such a quick jump in changes that it was handled very differently than here. So we can see the same thing with our mind. Um, we have to stop feeding it unhealthy things. It's Are we saying we should never feed it something unhealthy? No, right? We're always going to eat junk food. I had some chips earlier, but just a few, not enough to make me unhealthy. Are we never going to eat candy again? No, that's not what we're saying. Can we reduce our unhealthy foods? Yes. Can we reduce our unhealthy mental intake? Yes. And that's kind of what our first steps goal should be. So the tendency, I think, especially for Americans, is we read something like this and we take it very extreme. Like, okay, I have to stop doing this altogether. Or Kosho said he doesn't, comment on politics, so I should stop. No. Uh, my mom will call me immediately. Did you see what your aunt put on? Yeah, I saw it. So it doesn't mean that you don't engage. You just observe how much involvement are you have. Try to be more aware, and the development of the awareness will change your behavior naturally, right? If you're more aware and you have that mindfulness, you'll naturally make the change, and it'll be gradual. It's not going to be this suddenly you get rid of your favorite junk food, or you don't have ice cream or anything like that. Same thing. It works both ways. If you look at the standard, why am I highlighting social media and things like that? If you look at the 10 vows that are in the standard Shingon service, a lot of them have to do, the majority of them have to do with things you do with your speech. So how we use speech has a lot to do with how our mind is impacted. I think at no time ever in human history is that more true now, where the words we use can spread around the world very quickly and can have devastating impacts on a lot of people. So we have a lot of updates coming to us every day about our ongoing crisis, and it has significant impacts on us. Some of those impacts are insecurity, anxiety, all kinds of things. So I had a Zoom meeting earlier today with someone in another part of the state, and I just said, I want to just be aware that whether you're personally affected or not, there's quite a bit of anxiety, and people are suffering from anxiety, and their whole body language changed, and they just, I'm just so happy that you recognize that. So I think they said even they're tired of Zoom and doing these things and meetings, and they were very they had a lot of anxiety, but no one wanted to talk about it. So we have to be aware of it. So just again, the benefits of true mindfulness here is the real awareness of what the impact the environment has on us is very beneficial. So what's what's an easy meditation? What's an easy mindfulness practice? All of us are experiencing the same thing. This, these stay-at-home orders. So you can ask yourself, does your mind operate the same way now as it did before the quarantine? Do you focus on the same things? Do you respond to things the same way? I know for me, going to the grocery store is a totally different experience. I had to stand in line today to get in, so that's new. There's limitation on the number of people that can be in the store at the same time. So that raises all kinds of new thoughts, right? So go down a little bit farther. There's a, you can look at this same issue even more philosophically, and I think the translator's note does a good job here. So the translator's note says, in quotes, not truly realizing oneness with suchness. So I was going to avoid this because it's a little terse, but this is literally not knowing that the Dharma of suchness is one, or perhaps not knowing that suchness and Dharma's phenomena are one. In any case, the meaning remains the same. This has been called basic ignorance. The discussion is on the two seemingly opposite concepts of enlightenment and non-enlightenment. So I think the next sentence is probably the best part here. From the author's point of view, the polar concepts are not mutually exclusive or contradictory. They are merely relative, since enlightenment is inconceivable in the absence of non-enlightenment. They coexist temporarily as it were, in mutual dependence on the ground of the original enlightenment. Neither enlightenment nor non-enlightenment should be considered to be an absolute state. The irrelevancy of taking either of them to be a concrete state of being, in other words, the absurdity of regarding a relative as an absolute or a conventional and symbolic expression as literally true, is here demonstrated. That was a mouthful. That's a lot of philosophy, 300 level philosophy. So I'm going to extend my hunger metaphor. Healthy food and junk food are composed of the same things. Food. Healthy food comes to us in a more unrefined state, its original state. So I was living in Ohio for a while, and if you don't know, it has the largest unbroken area of corn production. So go on Google Maps later and look in Northeast Ohio. It's just corn. It's amazing, but just corn. So you can eat plenty of corn. I'm not aware of any negative side effects of eating lots of corn. You can have corn with every meal, probably. You'll be okay. Corn syrup, however, perhaps you should have less of that. So we don't need as much refined sugar, but both exist in the corn plant simultaneously. So this text is saying, it's easier to understand maybe from our perspective. The enlightenment or our unenlightened state has to be compared to something. So we discuss enlightenment, but it's not our experience. However, by drawing the distinction, we can more readily see what our mind is doing. So this is the benefit. So the text continues on down. Because of its non-enlightened state, the deluded mind produces three aspects which are bound to non-enlightenment and are inseparable from it. So here we get to some tangible step-by-step explanations. So here we are, unenlightened. There are three states our mind put us in. This is what we're doing to ourselves. That's what the text is saying. Like, this is the result of the unenlightened mind, especially the one that doesn't reflect on itself. First is the activity of ignorance. The agitation of mind because of its non-enlightened state is called activity. When enlightenment is unagitated, when it is agitated, anxiety or dukkha follows. For the result, anxiety is not independent of the cause, the agitation contingent upon ignorance. All right, more philosophy class talk. So let's make it a little bit easier. First, just a general thing. Whenever you see the word ignorance in a Buddhist text, it's not talking about stupidity. It's not talking about lack of knowledge. It's referring to a lack of insight. So we're seeing things the wrong way. We view the world one way, and we take it as being exactly how we see it. So that's how you should be reading ignorance. So don't read it as a insult to someone. Those ignorance or our lack of knowledge of the enlightened state. And it says, as a result, we feel agitation. So this is a different or interesting way to define dukkha. So dukkha is generally translated as suffering. So here it's being translated as agitation. So I think first, as I mentioned, the text gives us a lot of opportunities to test the theories. So who has not felt agitation in the last few months? So you may not classify it. You may say, oh, I'm not suffering because of the coronavirus. I'm not suffering because I have to stay home. But here, who has not felt agitation about this situation? There's got to be some agitation. There's states of unknowing. How long will this go on? I don't mean it has to be terribly severe, but we have to be asking ourselves those questions. We have to be asking, do I need a mask in these situations? Should I wear gloves? Should I go out at all? Should I cancel this? Should I cancel that? There's agitation. And the text talks about ignorance. So what about ignorance? Because of the agitation, we may make wild assumptions or speculation. So I would bet that our discussions, right, our personal discussions about coronavirus at the end of February or the beginning of March are very different from the way we talk about it today. So there's a lack of good information. So we see things the wrong way. We have a certain ignorance about it. And because of that, we make false assumptions. Sadly, I think that was the case for most governments in the early stages responding. There was whatever the level of information available, there wasn't good messaging. Nobody had a good messaging in the beginning. It doesn't matter what country or political party. We could have all done better, I think, if we had listened to experts. But there is a desire to superimpose a particular result on the situation rather than approach it objectively. So everyone wanted one result, right? No one wants the situation we're in. So that gets in the way of seeing things clearly. So that, in the Buddhist context, we would say is a type of ignorance. And it leads to more agitation. So there's this cycle. So this is what this text is talking about. It also is telling us there's an alternative. So the unenlightened state feels agitation. It's telling us the enlightened state has no agitation. And I think it's interesting, this connotation of agitation with dukkha. Sometimes I've seen translators use stress, but I actually think that in many cases, agitation, anxiety are more approachable. Suffering, I don't think I've felt any suffering in our common usage in the last few weeks. A sense of just not knowing or what comes next and asking questions, definitely. So it might help to kind of look at the term dukkha a little bit more. So you can think of it in terms of sorrow, uncomfortableness, unhappiness, distress, difficulty. The problem for Western translators is it was translated into Chinese and used a single character, and that character is cool, and it literally translates as suffering. In fact, you're probably familiar with the term coolie for someone who's a laborer, who came out of Hong Kong and that kind of thing. And that literally is a life of suffering. So it's a typical misunderstanding. It's similar to, we often have the connotation of the term Sherpa as someone who does manual labor. In fact, Sherpas are an ethnic group. So they aren't all meant to be doing carrying people's luggage up Mount Everest. They're the closest group, and so they make money doing that. So very similarly, the kind of pidgin English coolie became known as a worker, but in Chinese, it's actually this sort of life of suffering because this manual labor was very difficult. So the translation from it, and we in the West suffer from these sort of overly literal translations. This term "cool" in Chinese was, often too simply translated, just the dictionary translation, suffering. So then you get so many Buddhist books repeating the same error. Buddhism believes all life is suffering, and that's not accurate. This translation, I think, is better. Buddhism would say at some point in your life, you're going to experience agitation and anxiety. Right? So that's far more approachable. In the actual Buddha's teaching, there are many types of things that are categorized under dukkha. This can arise as a result of sensory experience, physical experience, mental experience. So agitation is very much mental. There can be physical discomfort and sensory discomfort. Let's say you buy a brand new house and it's lovely, but unbeknownst to you, you've moved into next to the sewage treatment facility. And every time you saw the house initially, the wind was blowing in one direction. So, oh, it's really wonderful here. It's nice. And then as soon as you move in, the wind changes. So now every day is suffering for your nose. So this discomfort overall can falls into this category. In the Abhidharma, so in the kind of earliest texts that Buddhists use to describe dukkha, they translate it as harassment, or to be harassed. So like for your senses to be assaulted, right? An affront to your sensibilities. This was thought of in Indian thinking as these aspects of the being are harassed by some outside source. So, and if you think about harassment, some outside force is sort of pushing against you, and then that can be internalized, and it also pushes against you. It disturbs you. So this is a better way of understanding dukkha. So this is, of course, one of the Four Noble Truths. So that's why I wanted to stop on it. It's always useful, I think, to remind ourselves when we're reading a commentary that's written hundreds and hundreds of years after the Buddha taught, we're not deviating so much from that initial teaching. So the Buddha said this dukkha comes in 4 flavors: birth, aging, sickness, and death. And along with these, there are psychological forms of harassment or agitation. And they include having to be around things we don't like, or having to associate with people we don't like, having to be separated from people that we love. I think we're all having this agitation right now. We probably can't visit certain people. We can't visit in the way that we want to. Um, I would prefer to see you all in person than to do a Zoom call. I have the laptop propped up on a cardboard box, so my viewpoint is not as interactive. So that causes a type of agitation. So this is a form of dukkha, and not getting what we want, right? So I'm sure everyone had to change plans in a variety of ways as a result of the coronavirus. So that's a type of dukkha. We didn't get what we wanted. Our plans changed. And the Buddha was clear that the um, the body presents challenges, right? Um, it changes over time, and um, a lot of times we associate it only with aging, right? And that those are the things that are unpleasurable. I guess today you'd call it precocious. When I was younger, they used a different word, but I'll just say precocious. When I was younger, I like to hide, and then I would jump out and scare my mom, and I thought that was hilarious. So she didn't always think it was so hilarious, but our house had a kind of built into the wall. There was a small box, a door where you could store firewood, and it was a very small opening, but I had figured out how to get in there, and it was my best hiding place. So I would hide in there, and no one could guess that I could fit through the space. So finally, rather than just hiding, I jumped out, and my mom was scared, but she was also just so intrigued that I could fit inside that little box. So eventually, for those of you who know me, I'm not short. So eventually, I could no longer fit, and I had the suffering of my favorite hiding place no longer being suitable for my now incredibly tall body. So that was a type of uh, agitation, distress that was a result of the body, right? So I think sometimes we think of it just far too often as I get older and my hair turns gray, or I lose my hair, or my back becomes stooped or something like that. But this quality can be anything, right? You have a favorite shirt and you grow out of it because you got older. Um, I remember, again, going back to childhood, there was a point where you could no longer find footed pajamas, and it was kind of heartbroken. Now you could find them again as an adult, but back then you couldn't. So that was a kind of agitation associated with the body that it changed, and it caused an agitation mentally. So um, sometimes we only look at the very you know we lump these agitations or these things that could be a dukkha into this very narrow uh, category. And it could be something that actually is funny, or in hindsight is, gives us a different perspective. But I think it's helpful when we're encouraged to develop compassion. Someone else may be suffering, they may be agitated in a way that doesn't agitate us. And if we are a bit more flexible in our thinking about how this impacts us, I think it's can only be more helpful for us to understand ourselves and other people's journey. So, so that's the first of the three examples the text gives. Is first the activity of ignorance. So it goes. Second is perceiving subject. Because of the agitation that breaks the original unity with suchness, there appears the perceiving subject. When unagitated, the mind is free from perceiving. So what does this mean? So because of the agitation, right? Because I can no longer wear footed pajamas, we begin to insert ourselves into a myriad of different scenarios. So then our mind goes, well, what else can I wear? Or am I going to outgrow my favorite shoes? What about my favorite rain boots? What kind of person will I be when I can't wear, my favorite rain boots? Or, it flows to a lot of different things. So we're not always aware as it's happening that the mind takes us in that direction. But this is what the text is asking us to reflect on. So we start this cycle. What if this? What if that? What if this? What if that? And we project it not just internally, but externally. Why did someone talk to me in that way? I wonder if they're talking about me still. So all manner of thoughts come up as a result. So all these things come up for us. So the text is saying to be on guard for this kind of mental activity. So it happens all the time, but it's always going on.
Could I ask a question?
Of course.
Okay, so what I was reading in this particular paragraph, okay, the paragraph before refers to an activity.
Yes.
And then the second paragraph refers to the perceiving subject, which I think can be confusing because you could confuse the subject with an entity, but it's really an activity as well.
Yes.
I just thought if I'm thinking that, is that correct?
No, it is correct. So there's the activity of your own mind perceiving, and then there's the activity of us separating ourselves from what's being perceived. So there's a second kind of philosophical undercurrent where Buddhism is telling us the underlying problem overall is that we are making distinctions. That's harder to observe because it's very difficult to live as a human being and not make those distinctions. But in a more ultimate becoming enlightened state, that's one of the bigger overarching themes also. But yes, you're correct. So the third one there says, third is the world of objects. Because of the perceiving subject of the world of objects erroneously appears. Apart from the perceiving, there will be no world of objects. So I guess that goes naturally into the third one there. It is a bit more philosophical, but I tried to come up with an example. And I came up with chartreuse. So is chartreuse green or yellow? And forgive my French pronunciation. Chartreuse. I didn't study French. So is chartreuse green, yellow, or something else? Mystery for the ages. But it's so unique that the French developed a new word for it, chartreuse. It's not called green, it's not called yellow, it's something new. But in fact, it's a blend of so many different things. And it's such a blend that it's something unique. And our minds can't help but stop and try to decipher this riddle. What is it? And so it's this reflection. The action of our unenlightened mind makes countless distinctions, right? We're constantly parsing things out. The true nature of things is far more harmonious or homogeneous, but it's our mind that makes those distinctions. And I think it's a good time to make it's like a perfect segue to a Taoist reference, right? Everything is the Tao. There's only the Tao. And this is why these, if you read, especially Chinese Buddhist writing, they are filled with kind of Taoist references or usages because it's just such an easy segue or manner of explaining. So there's only the Tao. We distinguish yin and yang, right? And then the myriad of things that follow from that, right? So as soon as we make a distinction between light and dark, all other kinds of things come up, all these different shades of gray and everything else. But if you look at the Taiji symbol, it's in movement. The idea is that they're constantly one's becoming the other. There is no stopping. Our mind stops, right? But it doesn't. So it's East Asian Buddhism borrowed greatly from Chinese philosophy because it's a great way of explaining things. But for people in East Asia, it was kind of a readily available um, system that worked with politics, philosophy, religion, history, and it was so already kind of interwoven into the culture that it was natural that Buddhist philosophers would kind of glom onto the same language. I don't know if we in the West have such a overarching or integrated existing theory. The closest thing I could come up with really is probably mathematics. We do have a tendency to um, express a great deal of concepts in terms of mathematics, but it's not quite as integrated. So I will continue to embrace the East Asian usage of 5 elements and those kind of things. So I will pause there if there are any questions. Seeing none, I'm going to experiment with 2 things tonight. One is to see if we can do a little bit of meditation through Zoom, and the other, and this will be coming out in an email from the temple, is a survey to see if people might be interested in watching a film and then having another Zoom meeting to discuss the movie. So I found a movie that has a lot of Buddhist themes. I apologize in advance; it is subtitled, but it came out a few years ago. I was able to watch it over the weekend. I thought as I was watching it would be really good since we're stuck at home largely. It's helpful for reflection, and there's a lot of things that are in Buddhism culturally that sometimes come up as questions. So I thought it might be useful to have people watch the movie and talk about it. So be on the lookout for that email. And if you're interested, then reply. We might schedule it either for Thursday or do it as like a Saturday at some time when, most people can get online and a little bit more free. I'll try to explain some of the symbolism and ideas behind it, and people can maybe chime in and be ripe for discussion. Everyone that I've recommended it to has had a lot of questions come up after watching it, so I thought it might be good. So next, I thought we might try a little bit of meditation. So with regard to this part of the text, the author is telling us that developing awareness is one of the first steps in this process. And it's a process of looking within, and maybe we can even say listening within. So I want you to think of meditation not as a zero-sum game, that I'm doing meditation to get enlightened. Is that true? Yes. Are you doing meditation to make your life right now and your experience of things right now better? Yes. Is there only one way that you can do things? No, you can have both goals. My preference is that you have somewhere in your mind like, oh, I that enlightenment thing sounds good. That'd be nice. But it doesn't have to be only that. So meditation is being offered in a variety of different situations in the world, for different professions, to address stress. And I will say that given all the anxiety and things that we have going on, it can only help us approach this new time in life. So if we can't see past our anxiety during this time in life, it's going to be very difficult to get to any other goal. So the more awareness we develop in the midst of this crisis, I think the better off we'll be. So while I have the Buddhas behind me, I will encourage the ultimate goal, but our short-term goal of developing focus, equanimity, and patience is wonderful while we wait for wisdom and compassion. So think of this as an opportunity to tune in to yourself, observe your thoughts, observe your emotions, even observe your body, the deeper patterns in your mind. All of those things are beneficial and improve your practice. So you're going to try to do is allow your senses to settle down. So I think my incense has gone out, but the room is still filled with the fragrance. So I sadly can't share that with you, but it gives you an opportunity to focus on your senses and try to make connections that the busy and occupied mind can't see. So that's some of the very good benefits, immediate benefits of meditation practice. You may find solutions emerge and some of your problems begin to dissolve. So we'll start off. So you want to try to, I apologize, the angle here isn't big enough, but if you can sit cross-legged, that's good. If not, sitting in a chair with your feet flat. Sometimes that means you need to lift your hips up or move to the edge of your seat or find a different chair. But if you're using a chair, try to see if you can get your feet flat. So some of us, our feet might dangle. You want to try to avoid that when you do the practice. And then your posture overall, you want to be able to sit without becoming drowsy or restless. So that's going to be some of the keys to focus on. So if your posture is making you too tired, then you may be slumped and just a little bit too relaxed. But if it's too military straight, you may be restless. So you want to be somewhere in the middle. So relax, but not falling asleep. And depending on where you are with meditation practice, you don't want to be uncomfortable. So you don't want to associate this with discomfort or something you don't want to do. So make sure you're comfortable and you can at least keep this for, we have about 15 minutes that we can do this evening. And for your head and back, you want your back straight, but again, comfortable, and your head in a position where you're even with your shoulders. So I'm going to invite you all to take a deep breath in through your nose and out through the mouth. And as you do, just relax your body, relax your shoulders down. Take another deep breath in. Exhale out, just again, feeling your abdomen relax. Just checking in with your body and seeing if there's anything, if you're holding any tension anywhere. And then take another deep cleansing breath in. Relaxing out. And you want to bring your tongue to the top of your mouth. If your hands are crossed, you have your right, top of the left. You can use the thumbs touching the traditional meditation posture. And if you've ever looked at the statue of the Buddha, you'll notice the eyes aren't wide open, but they're not closed. They're gazing down in front of you. You're not focusing the eyes on anything in particular. Just relaxing the gaze. And for the focus tonight, we're going to count the breathing. So you start breathing in and out through your nose, and just maintaining awareness of the breath. So as you breathe in and out, you're going to, inside your mind, count 1. Then inhale, exhale, and just observe you're counting 2. We're all going to breathe at different rates. So when you reach 10, you'll start over again at 1. So just try to stay with that focus. Just keep focused on your breathing and counting your breathing. If you lose track of your counting, just start over again at 1. No judgment. Just try to keep your focus there. And you want your breathing to be deep. So really feel the belly go out. Take a nice deep breath in and out. So we'll start with the sound of the bell. So in the beginning, just follow the bell with your mind from the loudest point till you can't hear it any longer. And then just focus on your breathing and counting the breath.